Survival Guide. And I have Deepan Shah here, who manages our cloud services practice with the Professional Services Group. As well, we have John Campbell, who is, John Summers, VP and General Manager of Enterprise Business with Akamai. Nigel Fenwick, Vice President, Principal Analyst at Forrester, and our own Brian Kelly, Chief Security Officer for Rackspace. So thanks. Look forward to this afternoon. Go ahead, Deepan.
Jared, thank you all for joining us today. Our goal of this session is to kind of help you provide with a survival guide for IT transformation. And we have a panel of experts who's going to kind of talk through specific topics, specific areas within transformation, which typically relates to IT in the enterprise. With that being said, I'll let each of you introduce yourselves. Sure. Before you do that, I have a set of questions that I'm going to ask. But if you guys have any question in the session, this is your session. I want you to raise your hand, and we'll just take questions organically. Cool? All right, let's go.
All right, great. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm John Summers. I've been at Akamai now about 10 years. My background there has been initially in making websites faster, but my background before Akamai was all about security. And so was instrumental in building out our security portfolio, security services, and now, as you heard, my title is in enterprise, which simply means helping enterprises undergo the transformation that they need to go through as they move and adopt the cloud.
Hi, I'm Nigel Fenwick at Forrester. So I used to be a CIO at Reebok in the UK, and then I moved to the dark side and worked in the marketing for a technology company for a number of years before starting up a couple of companies and then joining Forrester as an analyst. I've been there 11 years now. Time flies. I focus mainly on digital transformation and helping companies with their business strategy, but I do a lot of work with CIOs on transforming their own IT organizations as well. So looking forward to today's discussion.
Yeah, good. I love it when they introduce panelists as experts. In fact, our CIO his name is Ryan. I'm Brian. And when they asked me to be on this IT transformation, I said, no, you get the wrong guy, you mean Ryan. But they said, no, you're the guy, so here I am. But Brian Kelly, been at Rackspace about 2.5 years now as the Chief Security Officer. I'm responsible for anything that kind of looks and smells and walks like security. I've got physical, personnel, cyber, fraud, enterprise risk, business continuity, a whole number of things. Been in security going on 38 years now. Half that time is with the US government, kind of special ops, clandestine ops for 10 years or so of that, which gives you an interesting perspective of the world. And then ran the Giuliani Advanced Security Center here in Manhattan post 9/11 and took over the forensics labs here in New York for a couple of years. Had my own company, tried to bring some of that intelligence background into industry, so created iDefense, was one of the first cyber threat intelligence companies. A few years later, sold that off to VeriSign, and I just saw it got bought again by Accenture about a month ago, so it's good to know it's still alive and well, so it's good to be with you.
Thank you. Before we start, how many of you here are involved in some form or fashion in some sort of a transformation within your enterprise or in the IT side? Give me a hand.
Lots. Good.
So you want this session to be extremely, bifocal. We got to ask questions, your problems, your pain points. We don't want to go through a script. So let's just all kind of come in and.
What he's saying is he wants to be off the hook for asking questions.
Thank you, yes, thank you. So let's level set, guys. How do you define IT transformation?
Well, so we do a lot of research on overall transformation, and that feeds into what's accelerating sort of the IT transformation. So a lot of it does come down to understanding, what Dan was talking about this morning about the customers having the technology in the palm of their hands and that expectation, because that technology is evolving so fast, the expectations of customers are evolving very quickly alongside that. Those expectations then drive the need for business to evolve very quickly, because you have to meet those changing expectations, otherwise customers will go somewhere else. And that puts additional pressure on the IT organization to look at how the company can leverage technology to drive revenue. So we've seen this shift from IT used to be sort of thinking of IT as, okay, just keep the lights on, keep the costs down, like apply the technology to improve productivity. And now the whole thing's turned around to say, okay, keeping the lights on is table stakes. You really have to, yes, productivity is important, but you have to create the agility and you have to drive revenue growth, which means applying technology to create value for customers. That's a whole different world for most people in IT.
Do you guys want to add?
Yeah, I would just simply say just doing business differently. And I think we had a speaker this morning that was interesting. His 10x versus his 10%, I thought was another interesting way to look at it. Later in our hour, I'll be critical of the security industry because I think as an industry, we failed in a lot of respects by just doing things incrementally over the last kind of 20 years, and we still find ourselves largely losing the battle. And I don't think we've had sufficient innovation in our industry in quite some time. So it's probably a model of kind of what is not innovation, quite frankly. But yeah, to me, I mean, I look at the companies like Netflix. One minute they're mailing you DVDs, and the next minute they're streaming content, and then the next time they're creating content. And that's there's a gazillion of those examples out there. But they just rethinking how they do business and create value for consumers.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think Nigel hit on the key point there. Is it really is about enabling the next generation of customer experiences.
It's true.
The digital natives have all created these great digital experiences for the end users, and then so the legacy companies, most of us, because we weren't all digital natives, sort of look at that and go, all right, so what's the ramifications of that for the rest of the way I operate?
Right.
Like, God, I got to rework my business processes so that I can develop a better customer experience. And then that has ramifications for my IT infrastructure, so how do I do that? And that sets up that inverted value chain that Nigel was talking about.
And the whole 10x thing that came up this morning is really important, because you think about a lot of what we do in IT is that incremental change, right? Trying to get that incremental step forward and improvement. But if you radically rethink and say, how do we, if we take all the technology that's available today, or going to be available in the next 2 to 5 years, how would we change the way we do what we do? Right? How would we change? I do an exercise with the CIOs where I sort of get them to say, okay, apply some blue sky thinking here. You go through what could we do to change the business? Then you say, okay, well, imagine if you were doing a startup in your industry. What would you do then? And the thinking is radically different.
Right. So, John, in your experience, what are the main catalysts or drivers that drives businesses to transform?
Well, so it does, I think, as I said just moments ago, start with the customer experience. But the IT organizations are not typically customer facing, right? So they don't have a direct touch point and knowledge of that. So my own personal experience with the companies that we deal with have been, as they've sort of moved to trying to modify the way they do what they do, they sort of have looked at what has taken place with people adopting cloud and said, well, that's nice, but because of security, I'm not going to do it that way. I'm going to keep things in-house, and I'm going to try and do sort of what they did in terms of adopting cloud, but I'm going to do it inside my environment. And that experience has not been successful in general. Pockets of success based on the companies I've worked with, and I'd say that a lot of them have moved beyond that now to, well, they still have some private cloud infrastructure. The conversations are much more about use of public cloud infrastructure, and frankly, in some cases, multi-cloud infrastructure. And how do I do that successfully? How do I migrate from my today state, where it's all sort of in my private data centers or in the private cloud stuff I've built, and how do I successfully go and begin to extend out and expose my applications to the public cloud infrastructure?
Thanks. Nigel?
Well, I would say that what we're seeing sort of the IT group has the opportunity now to get out with the customer, to actually go and meet customers and figure out how do we apply technology to create value. And tied to that opportunity is the opportunity to say, you know what, we don't need to actually manage all our own infrastructure.
Right.
We can actually hand that over to somebody who can do that much better than us, and take our scarce resources and focus on the things that do create value for customers, that differentiate us in the marketplace. And that's a huge opportunity for IT.
Yeah.
But you have to be willing to step up and take that opportunity.
And I think the best CIOs, to your point, do that. They do go out and spend time with the
Absolutely.
customers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, sometimes you just need that handhold, right? I mean, it's one hand to say, hey, if we were a startup, what would I do different? But you're missing maybe that one piece, and then all of a sudden some innovation comes along, and that's the one puzzle piece that then explodes kind of your opportunity. In a sense, for me anyway, my time with Rackspace is really my first exposure, honestly, in the cloud, and I kind of had one of those moments as I got into the cloud and started to try to understand, what we do and the value and everything, and I was both excited and frustrated all at the same time. The excitement was the potential of the cloud to finally change the way we deliver security, yet we've got security technologies and models and stuff that are operating today that that are in place and we have to kind of serve. So I used to say it's the old change a tire on a moving vehicle. I used to like to say that, but actually somebody did that. I don't know if you saw, there's a YouTube video. They flipped the car up on two wheels and changed the tire, and so I can't say that anymore. But so now, being an old Air Force pilot, I say it's like changing the engine on a plane that's in flight, right? You can have all these great ideas about how we want to innovate and bring new technologies and solve some of our security problems, but we still got to serve 300,000 customers. So honestly, it's really what I struggle with every day. I mean, I've been somewhat critical. I know there's probably security industry people here. I've been somewhat critical for years about, if we're honest with ourselves, very little has really worked in the last couple of decades, right? Everything is a Band-Aid, right? AV didn't really work, and so we had to drop IDS and IPS behind it, and that quite didn't really work for apps, so we had to put a WAF behind that, and what we've got today is just unwieldy complexity, which really is the enemy of security in and of itself. That's the biggest problem we have, is just dealing with complexity. So, I think the innovation opportunity is to, that handhold is cloud, and say, wow, okay, with this cloud model, how can we rethink security? And some of the things that are emerging that I think have great potential for us and are still evolving is, some of the software-defined microservices, containers. We're really just starting to get our hands around how we can change, move security from the network, up the stack, closer to the user, kind of creating a zero trust, zero standing permission type environment. So we're not there yet. We got a lot of work to do, but to my opening point, I needed the handhold to kind of really think differently. And for me, cloud was, oh man, this is it. I think we got a chance here. But we got a lot of work to do.
It's why strong business partners are important, right? So IT groups that try and do it on their own are never going to be successful as those that identify the strategic partners that can help them bring expertise and knowledge that they maybe don't have, and get those aha moments of how do we think differently about what we're doing. So it's a really important point.
Good point. Yeah.
So Nigel, to that point, what are the smart companies doing to decrease cost? I'm sure I'll get a laugh in the room here.
What are the smart companies doing to what?
To decrease their IT
decrease
costs.
cost. Spending less. Cloud's an interesting question because a lot of people will say, well, cloud doesn't decrease cost, and I think it can, but it doesn't necessarily. It will create potentially agility, and so my response to a CFO who's saying, well, we need to take 1% out of our IT costs, I will say, well, why? And they'll say, well, because it's too expensive. I'm like, well, how do you figure that out? Well, we benchmarked against all these other companies in our industry, and they all spend less, so we should spend less. And the next question is, well, if I can tell you if you spend 1% more, you'll decrease your costs in your business by 25%. Is that a 1% worth investing? And the answer is always yes, right? Because they're not stupid. So then I say, well, how do you know taking 1% out is the right answer? They don't know, right? Yeah, so it's like you got to look at the whole thing from a zero base up and say, where do we best invest the money to get the return? And the return is always, how can we drive revenue? If you go down that route, you've got to start with, well, what's the customer outcome, and how can we better deliver those outcomes using the investments we have? And technology is a key asset to leverage. So you've got to look at not only where can you take cost out, but where you're not maximizing that leverage on the technology investments you have. And security is a key component of this, right? Because customers demand trust. If you fail to deliver trust in the relationship with customers, you're going to lose that customer potentially for life.
Right.
And that's very expensive. And so most companies cannot afford to lose customer trust. And so you have to know how to deliver a secure, safe, trusted relationship through technology. And that's a real challenge for most companies.
Yeah, I agree with what you said, but I think the cost thing comes or is largely dependent upon what are the applications you're moving out to the cloud. So if you're moving sort of, in my own experience, a lot of the companies start with sort of the less business critical, like if I move this and it screws up, I'm not going to get in trouble. So the stuff that doesn't have the potential for the revenue impact, so they're moving back-end kind of stuff out to the cloud first, proving that that model works, and that is largely, I think, cost-driven thinking. But then as they see the potential for the scalability, the agile development nature of the cloud, then they'll start moving more of the more revenue-facing, marketing-facing applications out into the cloud. And then it's much less about cost. It's much more about how fast can this thing grow? How fast can I get new applications and new business opportunities out? And at that point, well, look, if you're successful, your costs are going to grow, but to your point, your revenues are going to grow faster. And so that's sort of starting with thinking about costs, but really ultimately focusing on agility, new value creation in the cloud. I think that's, in my experience, where I see most of our customers wind up.
We're just finishing a case study on GE and their transformation, and it's really interesting that they started getting these cost savings in the business through moving a lot of stuff to the cloud.
Yeah.
And the cost savings they were getting, there were hundreds of millions of dollars they're talking about across all of their businesses. And they plowed that saving back into building GE Digital. So it wasn't like they were just saying, okay, we're going to take those savings and drop them to the bottom line. They were taking those savings and recognizing we need to build this digital capability. And we're going to be able to fund that by extracting the savings out of our existing operations to be able to build that capability inside the organization.
That's a great point. Some of our financial services customers have gone through the same sort of thing, which was, cloud, no, hell no, to, all right, private cloud's what we're going to do, to a year later, they can't get to the public cloud fast enough, to 3 months later than that, I was meeting with the digital team. And they had never, this is a legacy financial service, they had never had a digital team, but following exactly the path you're describing.
Sort of a maturity stage that companies walk through this level of maturity to get to that true transformation.
Now, we talk about cloud in terms of cost and technology and new platforms. Let's talk about how much change in culture is an important piece of transformation, and how do enterprises embrace this?
Culture is actually, from the research, culture comes up as the #1 barrier to transformation. Not just IT transformation, but business transformation. It's the #1 barrier. And to your point, it's like the whole thing about changing the engine on the plane while you're flying. You've got the culture that's built around the existing organization. And a lot of that is sort of how you're measuring employees, all the way through how the CEO talks about the organization. All of this starts to set the organizational culture. And the culture of every large organization that's sort of a global enterprise is oriented around productively delivering products and services to a global audience.
Right.
And you have this hierarchical structure that is sort of really from the industrial era, sort of the industrial revolution sort of era, this very hierarchical command and control structure. And that is never designed to change quickly. It's designed to evolve pretty slowly. And yet now we're asking businesses, well, you've got to actually create a business that's going to change and innovate at the speed that technology is innovating and moving. That's just a completely different, it's a game changer. And companies today are not designed to do that. So existing cultures get in the way because we don't measure employees on the right things, we don't focus on the right things, we have the wrong kind of hierarchical structure, we don't encourage people to collaborate, we have a low tolerance of failure. Right? Most organizations are terrible at accepting failure.
Oh, absolutely. And yet the digital culture is fail fast.
Right.
Yeah.
Celebrate your failures, learn from your failures so you can change.
Yeah, I was just going to say, we got to do what we say. How many of us say, allow people to fail, or fail fast, fail smart? Easy to say, everybody's kind of like this. How many of us really do that, though? right? 'Cause
Right.
when somebody then burns some time and money and fails, and you're saying, "Oh, this guy, he's not working out. We gotta
Let's
move
fire
him
him, right?
aside." and it's like, so somehow we gotta really believe what we say, and it's like, no, wait, I'm gonna take a chance here. Let's invest some time, money, people, whatever it is, and yeah, I mean, you got to be smart about it. You got to have a plan and approach. It's not just a sandbox project, but if it doesn't provide any kind of real value, say, hey, we learned from this. Let's kind of move on. You got to let people get away with that. But I think it's hard sometimes because organizations will tell you that, yet when the rubber hits the road, they're going to believe that. They may take a different action. So.
I think that one other comment to follow up on that is just one of the critical success capabilities that companies that change fast is an ability to pivot quickly. In other words, if you know you're heading down a path and it's kind of not working out, like throw that yellow flag up immediately and figure out the alternate path quickly, rather than, oh my God, I got to cover that up and I got to fix it and I got to try and hide it from people. That legacy thinking of trying to hide things that are going wrong is anathema to this transformation mentality.
True.
Since we're talking about IT transformation, I just want to make one point around this, which is the metrics are probably the one trigger that you've got control of inside IT that you can change that will lead to a significant change in the culture of the IT organization. So there's two things I always focus on with transformation groups. One is changing the language of the organization. So the IT group should never talk about the customer like it's an internal employee. The customer is the person that's outside paying for goods and services inside. Right? So the customer is where the focus needs to be. The internal employees are partners to deliver value to those customers. But then you change the metrics inside the organization to measure every employee inside IT on a customer-facing metric. And you can you figure out what the metrics are the rest of the organization is using. They're using some kind of customer-facing metric, whether it's Net Promoter Score or Customer Experience Index, whatever it is. And you put that metric on every employee inside IT. I'm not saying you get rid of all the other metrics, but you put that metric on, and it changes the nature of the way we think in IT about what it is we're there to do, right?
Yeah.
So instead of thinking, I come to work and I've got to deliver this project on time, on budget, well, actually it matters if this project doesn't deliver the outcome that we're setting out to do. And now I'm going to say something if I don't think it's going to deliver that outcome. It's a very different mindset
Right.
for people.
One thought too that occurred to me when you were speaking too is recognize our limitations. And having spent some time in the government, there was a bit of arrogance, I think, sometimes among our acquisition community. Like, we were smarter than everybody else and we had all the answers. And so they failed to really reach out to people that could really help them and accelerate things. And you know what the result is. 2-3 years later, those people move on, everything kind of falls apart, and you've gotten nowhere in 2 or 3 years. So, some of us, I think, are afraid to ask for help, because sometimes that help costs money, right?
Right.
Hey, I might have to drop a couple $100,000 to bring kind of a consultant expert in, but that money can really propel you to kind of where you're trying to go. And one quick little story, and I did a little bit of consulting years ago, and I remember I went into a CIO, and he was asking me, he said, hey, how much would it cost to do a kind of security assessment, a maturity assessment of the organization? And I used to do this just as a little trick. I would say, well, look, if you let me sit in the conference room for an hour, I can write up your security assessment now. And he kind of looks at you funny, like, what? And I said, look, I guarantee, I can write down all the stuff that's wrong, and I'll probably be right about 90% of it. You really want to spend the money to have me tell you what you already know, or would you rather use that money to fix kind of some of this stuff? And I actually did the same thing at Rackspace. I got the Rackspace, and one of those things I always picked on was PKI, certificate management. It's usually always a mess. And so I came in right away, and I just said, I convinced me that our PKI and certificate management isn't the best that it can really be, and there was a little bit of resistance. People said, well, it turns out there's multiple group certificates and multiple people managing and everything, and we said, look, just get help. We got to go spend money. Now we got a company that does all of it. We eat our own dog food, right? It's cloud-based PKI certificate management. They do the entire thing, full life cycle certificate management for a cost of $100,000 a year. We were spending probably $1 million a year for something that wasn't really where it needed to be. So, but I felt a little bit of resistance to say, well, hey, we're smart technical people. We can kind of do this. And I said, no, I know you're smart technical people, but this isn't necessarily your niche. Stop trying to fool yourself that we can do everything. There are experts out there that do this stuff for a living. Let go once in a while. You got to spend money to save money, and the returns will be remarkable. So you got to know when to let go, when to spend a little bit of money, when to recognize that this isn't in our lane. Let's get people in here that can really help us.
Yeah.
Good. So you got 10 more minutes left, and I just want to give the audience the opportunity. I have a few more questions to go, but if you guys have any questions, feel free to jump in. Go ahead.
I want to revisit the point about your internal organization and being a customer. I don't want to get hung up on language,
Right.
but I think that the message might be misconstrued as saying, you don't have to worry about these folks, just worry about the external customer. Maybe you just put them on two different tiers. Maybe you make one the large customer, the external customer, a bigger C than the little, but you still have to have respect for and treat the internal users with courtesy.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah,
you
yeah.
can't hand out dull knives.
No. So that's a fair point. Good question to raise. So the employees that are internal inside the organization, IT is a service inside the organization. You have to understand how to create a great service. You have to be able to create a high impact service. You've got to be able to deliver service beyond expectations. So everything that you can learn about services and service delivery and service marketing, there's masses of research around service companies and how they deliver great service can be applied into IT and how it delivers service inside the organization. The problem with saying we have customers inside the company that are employees is it creates a mindset that we're a supplier and we're supplying these other people we're calling customers. And so now what's happening is you have a supplier-customer relationship. And once you set that up, then the customer looks at you as a supplier and says, hey, they're a supplier. So maybe I should look at other suppliers and see whether I can get my supplier better deal from somebody else. And it's not the relationship you want. You want a partnership relationship that says, we're in the same business as you, not another business. Because when I hear people say IT in the business, it drives me insane. It's like, which business are you in if you're not in that business? The IT is part of the business, so you partner up and you say, what are we trying to do here? We're trying to create value for that customer. We're trying to deliver better products, services, whatever it is. We're helping that customer get to an outcome. How can we do that together to deliver that and create revenue together? It's a partnership, and that's why I raised that.
Yeah, I would encourage you to think about it as a value chain, right? We're talking here about IT transformation, but that's fundamentally because you want to enable a business process transformation, which is all about doing a business transformation so you can deliver better value to the end customer externally. And you've got to deliver value all the way up that chain. And so that's where the partnership comes in, is in that communication and collaboration up and down that transformation value chain.
So in that transformation journey, let's talk about what are the ideal steps that a typical customer would take in that transformation journey, and what are the guiding principles?
I mean, it kind of depends upon the vertical, right? So what is the right steps for an e-commerce business versus a bank? They're going to be different. So, my experience in the commerce space is it's all about the millennials, right? We gotta get them, grab their attention. We've got to build an end customer experience in the store that's compelling, that's mobile friendly, that gives them the ability to get to what they need quickly, easily, and efficiently, and leverages social media with lots and lots of touch points to them. That's a different set of business processes you're trying to enable than in a bank, where the bank is still trying to engage, but the banks typically have things like real estate problems, a large branch network of a few thousand branches that all of a sudden all of the low value business transactions they used to do in those branches are being done on our smartphones or being done on the website. What the heck do they do with those branch locations? How do they get high value transactions to take place out there? How do they enable people in those employees in those branches to be capable of doing high value transactions? So I think it is business led.
Yeah, and I agree with you. And at Rackspace, the way we guide our customers is it's a 6-step journey. We break it down into plan, assess, design, migrate, manage, and optimize. And it's the abbreviation is PADMO, right? The planning phase is where you put the business case. You look at what needs to transform, how, and put together stakeholders, everything that goes in the planning phase. And then you start assessing either your infrastructure, your application, your data centers, your business needs. And you start getting into design phase where you're doing POC, looking at different technologies and platforms. And then you start talking about, hey, how we have made decisions around what needs to transform, what are we transforming? We know what is the platform that we're going to move to. We have designed that. How do we migrate? Then you start talking about migration, and you start talking about migration planning and assessment and all of that. And then you start talking about management. Once we move to the cloud, are we going to do a DIY? Are we going to use a managed service provider like Rackspace to provide support on the multi-cloud? Could be private clouds in Rackspace data center or your data center, or maybe in Azure or AWS or Google. Do I have the skills? And if not, those decisions are made in the managed space. And then once you have a decision on who's going to support it going forward, you move to the optimized phase, which is basically a circle where you start talking about automation, DevOps. How can you bring agility into your environment, not only at the infrastructure stack, but also at the application stack, where you start talking about CI/CD and stuff like that, which kind of all blends in to get that agility, which drives transformation and then drives outcome to the business.
And to go to Brian's point around, security really can be an enabler for that, especially as you look to start to move to this multi-cloud environment.
Yep.
How the heck do you wrap security around multiple clouds and yet still have unified control of the policy?
Brian, do you want to take that? Or why is
Yeah,
security?
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's getting to a point, everything you read in security in the last couple of years drives home that point, right? Board level issue and enabler, but it is. I mean, we've got to be the department of yes, right? We've got to find ways to do things. So, developers, need access to GitHub, and they love Slack, and it's really easy to find fault with, any of those technologies. But the right answer is to say, okay, I know the value in GitHub. Let's go ahead and create a private instance of GitHub. I can put some controls around it. You still have all the functionality you need. So we kind of meet in the middle.
Right.
And I think we have to work that way. I think it's also true with our customers too, right? We've got to have the same kind of open, honest dialogue with customers about what it is that they're trying to do from security. Cloud's gone through an interesting evolution because I think we refer to the phrase the uneven handshake, right? Which pretty much means you got to do all this stuff, customer. Then there's a dark line. Usually a contractor sitting right behind that line. And then you got the cloud provider, and I think for years, there was this clear distinction of, no, you guys have to do all of this stuff. I never liked that. I never liked this, idea of the uneven handshake. So I say, no, it's time to even out the handshake, right? How do we help each other more? Where can we reach across the line? But then we've got to have an enabling discussion with that external customer at the same time. So what is it that you're really trying to do? And let's find a creative way that we can really do that for you.
So in that specific point, or to that point, what are the cloud services provider doing today to help build the trust and confidence in our customers from a security and overall transformation standpoint?
Well, I mean, based on what I just said, so it started with this kind of realization is, I don't like this uneven handshake. There's got to be more we can do. And then, that kind of went to, look, we've got a lot of small, mid-sized customers that they have no ability to truly detect, in real time what's going on, understand it, contain it. There's some big enterprises that have that luxury. They can attract and retain high-end security people. They can build SOCs but they're the minority. The rest of the companies are struggling with this, and so this was an example where we said, hey, maybe this is the one way we can reach across the line and say, if this is an area you struggle as a company, we can really help you here and provide that level of service and take that gap off your plate. And then the point we made earlier in the conversation about cloud, being accelerator some innovation. One of the beauties, we were talking about it earlier, is one of the beauties of security managed services in the cloud is because we're managing that workload. Unlike a traditional managed service provider where they see something anomalous and they throw an alert at you.
Right.
And the people that catch the alert say, that's the problem. I don't know what to do with this alert. You know, I'm paying good money and all you're doing is telling me what's wrong, but I don't know how to fix what's wrong. But I think the cloud providers, you know, because we manage that workload, not only do we see the anomalous activity, we'll go ahead and negotiate pre-approved actions during the onboarding, and so our teams can actually act on those actions. So, you know, when the customer comes into work, he just gets an after-action report and says, hey, 11:23 last night, we saw this. You know, we implemented this pre-approved action, incident was closed at this hour, and he said, that's what I'm looking for. I just need you guys to take care of it and just let me know in the morning everything's
Yeah.
okay. I don't
They're looking
I don't
for an
want the
outcome,
calls.
right? They
Yeah,
want,
yeah,
the outcome
exactly.
they want is,
Yeah.
is an environment that they can trust is going to
Yeah.
be safe and secure. Right?
Yeah, and now the dialogue is great. I mean, customers are saying, man, you know, this compliance stuff drives me nuts. What can you do to help me with compliance? You know, threat and vulnerability management is driving me crazy. How can you help me here? Identity and access management is broken. You know, what can you do to help me? So you know, again, and we're not there yet on all of these things. Don't take me wrong, but these are, you know, these are pain points that we know you guys are dealing with. And I think, you know, as a partner, we can help, and we just got to find innovative, creative solutions to be able to help in all of those areas that we all struggle with.
And one of the key points you guys need to think through as you think about using managed security services is, look, as service providers, we're not just defending individual customers, we're defending hundreds or thousands of customers. And so we don't just see the attacks against one customer,
Yeah.
we see the attacks against all of the customers, and every attack we see, we can provide to benefit you individually. And so that broad visibility is something as an individual organization, it's basically impossible to get.
Yeah, yeah.
And so it's something you should consider.
And a really good piece of news, by the way. I'm really pleased. I mean, if you're familiar with the term ISAC, Information Sharing Analysis Center, has been around since the early '90s. They've had mixed success. Some of them are good, some of them not so good. But I will say that
FSISAC's amazing.
FSISAC's good. DoD ISAC has come a long way. So some of the newer ISACs are still struggling where we did 20 years ago. But the one thing I will tell you is the cloud providers, I am really pleased with how well the cloud providers work together. I mean, we meet every quarter. You know, my counterpart, Stephen at Amazon, Brett at Microsoft, Google, Facebook, LinkedIn, Amazon. We get together every quarter, and we're dealing with issues that don't even make the press, right? And we're working with supply. How do we protect the supply chain? Make sure the integrity of silicon and shipment. You know, we probably won't even talk about those things publicly, but we know that's important to the security of this environment, and we've got to work those things. You know, we're working the information sharing. So if I see an attack tonight, kind of to your point, if I see an attack tonight, that's on the wire to the other cloud providers, usually within an hour or two, because either they've already seen it or they're going to see it shortly. So,
and we do the same thing.
Yeah, and it's for the benefit of the industry,
Right.
right? It's bigger than any one of us, right? You know, because to the point when you made earlier, I mean, it's all about building trust and confidence in the cloud, and that's not Amazon or Rackspace or Google to do it on their own. That's all of us to do it together,
Right.
and with other industry partners.
Thanks, Brian. We are probably out of time, and that's why the MC is here. Ralph, we can take one question from you real quick if you.
Okay, an observation. So thank you, gentlemen, for connecting the dots that I haven't heard connected here through all the technology sessions I've seen.
Right.
Yeah.
And that being that all this is great, but why?
Yeah.
And so it's really all of this is really about being able to transform how you deliver IT services to the business.
Right.
And the final dot we haven't gotten to is to allow for the number one thing all businesses need. All of this is about enabling business growth, because
Yeah,
that's what all business,
Right.
you can't shrink your way to prosperity.
Spot
Yeah.
on.
And so when we think about all these technology pieces and using cloud, multiple clouds and all this stuff is great. But I think if you take the focus that says, I'm gonna do this with my business hat on, what can I do for business growth? Now what's my answer now? You get to a better place.
Yep.
Do you agree?
How do you use technology?
You stole my
to drive
thunder.
revenue
Thank you.
Well, we've got to wrap it up. I hate to stop this conversation because it's
I
great.
couldn't,
Can we
couldn't
get a
say it
hand
any
for this
better.
panel?
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Deepan, John, Nigel, and Brian. You know, I was taking some notes, and I think one of the things that really stand out to me is, you know, using transformation as an opportunity to think differently. You know, we talk about cost savings and things that you can reinvest into innovation, and really think about what differentiates your company and focus on that, because that's ultimately what helps your business grow and whatnot. So, thank you all again very much.
Thank
We're
you
gonna
all.
have
Thanks
the
for
next
joining.
session. start in
Thanks,
about
guys.
5 minutes, so we're having a pretty quick break today, but our next session starts at 3:25, so please come
Thank
back
you.
and join us.
Thanks, John.
Transformation challenges from the challenges.